Close your eyes. Imagine Britain at the edge of memory. The Roman roads are cracking. The legions are gone. Cities that once echoed with Latin now whisper in broken tongues. Fog rolls over green hills where borders no longer mean safety, and night brings more fear than sleep. This is not the medieval world of shining armor. This is something older, darker, a land collapsing into uncertainty. And somewhere in that uncertainty, a name begins to form. King Arthur. Not yet a king, not yet a legend. At first, perhaps only a rumor, a warrior, a commander, a last defense against the Saxon tide. Or perhaps something stranger, a story invented to survive despair. Because Arthur exists in a place few figures ever reach. He stands between history and myth, between what might have happened and what humanity desperately needed to believe. For more than 15 centuries, his story has refused to die. Empires rose and fell, religions transformed Europe, science replaced superstition, and still, Arthur remained. Why? Because Arthur is not just a man. He is an answer to chaos, an answer to injustice, an answer to the question every broken age asks itself. What if a just ruler could exist? When people speak of Arthur, they rarely speak of dates or facts. They speak of symbols. A sword no one else can lift. A table where no man sits above another. A city where justice reigns without corruption. They speak of Camelot, not as a location, but as an idea. The dream of perfect order in an imperfect world. They speak of Excalibur, not merely as steel, but as legitimacy made visible. Power not taken, power granted. And they speak of a king who does not truly die. A king carried into mist, a king taken to Avalon, a king who waits, the once and future king. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Arthur may never have existed. No crown, no castle, no sword. And yet, he has shaped Western imagination more deeply than most men who did exist. How can that be? Because Arthur was born in a moment of historical trauma. After Rome abandoned Britain in the early 5th century, the island entered one of the darkest periods in its history. Written records vanished. Political order collapsed. Foreign invaders pressed in from every coast. For the people living through that chaos, hope was not a luxury. It was survival. And hope often takes the form of story. Arthur became the story that said, "We were not always weak. We were not always divided. We were once led by someone worthy." Whether Arthur was a real cavalry commander, a composite of forgotten war leaders, or pure invention almost no longer matters. Because legend did what history could not. It preserved meaning. Over centuries, that meaning grew. Monks wrote him into chronicles. Poets transformed him into romance. Kings claimed him as ancestor. Rebels whispered his return. Every generation reshaped Arthur to fit its fears. To medieval knights, he was chivalry made flesh. To Victorians, he was moral purity in a fallen world. To modern audiences, he is a mirror, reflecting leadership, betrayal, failure, and impossible ideals. Arthur is powerful because his story is unfinished. He rises. He gathers heroes. He builds perfection. And then, it collapses. Not because evil wins, but because humans fail. Love becomes betrayal. Justice becomes hesitation. Loyalty fractures. Camelot falls not to monsters, but to human weakness. And yet, even in ruin, the legend refuses to end. Arthur does not lie in a grave like other kings. He does not rot into history. He departs across water, into mist, into Avalon, leaving behind a promise instead of a corpse. That promise is why his story still speaks to us. Because as long as people believe that leadership should be just, as long as societies dream of equality. As long as we fear that our own golden ages might collapse, Arthur will return, not as a man, but as a story we tell when the world feels broken again. Tonight, we begin at the beginning, before the sword, before the crown, before Camelot. We return to the shadows of post-Roman Britain to ask the question that started everything. Was Arthur real? If Arthur was real, he lived in a world almost erased by time. Not the medieval Britain of castles and banners, not Camelot with its marble halls, but a land in collapse. In the early 5th century, Roman Britain died quietly. In 410 CE, the emperor told Britain what no province wanted to hear. Rome would not return. The legions withdrew. The imperial administrators vanished. The taxes stopped flowing. And the great machine that had governed Britain for nearly 4 centuries simply shut down. What followed was not instant chaos, but something worse: uncertainty. Roman roads still crossed the land, but no one maintained them. Stone villas still stood, but roofs collapsed and mosaics cracked. Latin was still spoken by elites, but fewer could read or write each generation. This was the world Arthur, if he existed, would have known. A Britain caught between worlds. The Romano-British population, descendants of Celtic tribes shaped by Roman rule, tried to hold civilization together. Local leaders stepped into the vacuum left by Rome. Christian bishops gained influence. Old Celtic beliefs never fully disappeared. But danger pressed in from all sides. From the north came the Picts, from the west, Irish raiders, and from the east, across the North Sea, came the Saxons, Angles, and Jutes. At first, they came as mercenaries, later as conquerors. According to later tradition, a British ruler named Vortigern invited Saxon warriors to defend Britain, only to watch them turn against their hosts. Whether this story is accurate or symbolic hardly matters. It captures how Britons felt: betrayed, overrun, abandoned by empire. The period between roughly 450 and 600 CE is often called the Dark Ages. Not because people were barbaric, but because we can barely see them. Written records almost disappear, and this is the problem with Arthur. If he lived in the dark. There is no contemporary biography, no royal charter, no crown buried in a grave, only fragments. The earliest near-contemporary hint comes from a Welsh poem known as Y Godo Dyn, possibly composed around the year 600. It praises a warrior by saying, "He was brave, though he was not Arthur." The line is frustrating and revealing. Arthur is already a standard of comparison, a name that means ultimate warrior. But still, no details. More substance appears centuries later in a work called Historia Brittonum, attributed to Nennius, written around 830 CE. Nennius does not call Arthur a king. He calls him Dux Bellorum, a war leader. Arthur, he says, fought 12 battles against the Saxons. The final and greatest was at Mount Badon, where Arthur personally killed hundreds of enemies. It sounds heroic, too heroic. And that's the problem. Nennius writes long after the events he describes. He mixes folklore with history, and his geography is puzzling. The battles are scattered across Britain, from the south to the north. Was Arthur everywhere at once? Or are we seeing multiple victories merged into one hero? Another source, the Annales Cambriae, compiled in the 10th century, mentions 2 events. The Battle of Badon, where Arthur carried the cross of Christ. The Battle of Camelot, where Arthur and Mordred fell, brief. Cryptic, unverifiable. And then there is the most striking silence of all. The monk Bede, writing in the early 8th century, is our most reliable historian of early Britain. He describes the Battle of Badon, but he never mentions Arthur. Instead, he credits a Romano-British leader named Ambrosius Aurelianus. This absence is troubling. If Arthur was truly the supreme defender of Britain, why does Bede ignore him? Scholars have wrestled with this for generations. Some propose Arthur was a cavalry commander, perhaps descended from Roman officers, using mounted warfare against Saxon infantry. Such tactics would have seemed overwhelming, even legendary. Others argue Arthur is a composite, a fusion of several leaders, their victories merged into one name through oral tradition. And others say Arthur was never a man at all. He was a memory shaped into hope. A heroic figure created to explain why Britain once resisted and why it failed. Archaeology offers no certainty. Sites like South Cadbury were refortified during this period, showing organized resistance. But archaeology cannot name kings. It only whispers that someone mattered. So, was Arthur real? The honest answer is this: we don't know, and we probably never will. But something else is clear. Even if Arthur began as a man, he did not survive as one. He became something larger. A symbol born in history's shadows, shaped by fear, resistance, and longing. In the darkness after Rome, Britain needed a defender. Whether that defender lived or not, the legend filled the role. And once the legend existed, it no longer needed proof. In the next chapter, we meet the man who transformed these fragments into a king, the writer who turned shadow into empire, Geoffrey of Monmouth. Arthur did not conquer Europe with a sword first. He conquered it with ink. The transformation of Arthur from obscure Welsh memory into the greatest king in Britain's past began with one man in the 12th century, Geoffrey of Monmouth. Around the year 1136, Geoffrey completed a book that would change Western mythology forever. Historia Regum Britannia, the history of the kings of Britain. He claimed it was not his invention. According to Geoffrey, he was merely translating a very ancient book written in the British tongue, given to him by Walter, Archdeacon of Oxford. That ancient book has never been found. No one else ever saw it. Most historians agree it never existed. Geoffrey was not writing history as we understand it today. He was doing something far more powerful. He was creating a national myth. 12th century Britain needed one. After the Norman conquest of 1066, England was ruled by French-speaking elites who governed an Anglo-Saxon population on land once claimed by Celts and Romans. Identity was fractured. Legitimacy was fragile. Geoffrey offered an answer. He traced Britain's origins not to barbarians, but to Troy. In his narrative, Britain was founded by Brutus, a descendant of Aeneas, the Trojan hero who also founded Rome. This meant Britain was Rome's equal, not its inferior. And at the peak of this glorious lineage stood Arthur. Geoffrey's Arthur is born in deception and destiny. King Uther Pendragon desires Igraine, the wife of the Duke of Cornwall. She refuses him. War looms. Enter Merlin. Through magic, Merlin disguises Uther as Igraine's husband. While the real Duke dies in battle, Uther lies with Igraine. Arthur is conceived that night. From the beginning, Arthur is marked by moral ambiguity, born of desire, deception, and supernatural intervention. When Uther dies, Britain falls into chaos. Multiple kings claim the throne. Then comes the miracle. Arthur pulls a sword from a stone, a brief moment in Geoffrey's telling, but one that later writers will transform into legend. Arthur is crowned, and from that moment, Geoffrey unleashes something extraordinary. This Arthur is not merely a defender. He is a world conqueror. He crushes the Saxons, subdues Scotland and Ireland, conquers Iceland, Norway, and Gaul. Eventually, Arthur's empire stretches across Europe. When Rome demands tribute, Arthur refuses. Not because he rejects Roman authority, but because he claims it. Arthur prepares to march on Rome itself. In Geoffrey's vision, Britain does not fall to empire. It becomes empire. Arthur is no longer a war leader in the Dark Ages. He is Alexander. He is Charlemagne. He is the emperor Britain never had. At the height of his power, betrayal strikes. Arthur leaves his kingdom in the hands of his nephew Mordred. Mordred seizes the throne, takes Guinevere, claims kingship. Arthur returns and meets him at Camelot. The battle is apocalyptic. Arthur kills Mordred, but receives a mortal wound. He is carried to Avalon, the Isle of Apples, where healing is possible, or death. Geoffrey ends ambiguously. Arthur does not die on the page. He departs. This single choice changed everything, because a dead king ends a story. A king who departs creates a promise. Geoffrey introduced almost every pillar of Arthurian legend. Merlin the prophet, Arthur's miraculous birth, the sword proving kingship, Guinevere as queen, Mordred's betrayal, the final battle, Avalon and the hope of return. But notice what is missing. There is no Round Table, no Lancelot, no Grail, no courtly love. Geoffrey's Arthur is not a moral philosopher. He is a conqueror, a political fantasy for a 12th century audience that longed for greatness. And it worked. Historia Regum Britannia spread like wildfire. Over 200 medieval manuscripts survive. It was translated into French, Welsh, and English. Kings loved it. Nobles quoted it. Scholars hated it. The historian William of Newburgh called it shameless lies. Gerald of Wales mocked it as demonic fantasy. But criticism failed. Because Geoffrey had done what history could not. He gave Britain a story big enough to believe in. After Geoffrey, Arthur could no longer return to obscurity. He was too complete, too compelling. Future writers would reshape him, soften him, moralize him, romanticize him, but they would never erase Geoffrey's foundation. Arthur now had a full biography: birth, rise, glory, betrayal, fall. That structure would endure for centuries. In the next chapter, French poets will take Geoffrey's warrior king and transform him into something entirely new. They will give him chivalry. They will give him romance. And they will give him the moment that defines destiny itself: the sword in the stone. Every legend has a moment where fate reveals itself. For Arthur, that moment is not a battle, not a coronation, not a conquest. It is a simple act. A boy reaches for a sword. What makes the sword in the stone so powerful is not its magic, but when and why it appears. In the versions developed by French writers of the late 12th and early 13th centuries, Britain after Uther Pendragon's death is leaderless. Noble houses feud. Claims to the throne multiply. Civil war looms. The land is desperate for certainty. So the church intervenes. On Christmas morning, the nobles of Britain gather for Mass. Outside the church, in the cold stone courtyard, they see something impossible. A massive stone, an anvil set upon it, and driven through the anvil, a sword. On the blade, an inscription: "Whoso pulleth this sword from this stone and anvil is right-wise king, born of all England." No riddles, no councils, no elections. Legitimacy made visible. One by one, Britain's most powerful men step forward. Great lords strain. Veteran knights pull until their hands bleed. Strong arms fail. The sword does not move. Days pass. Christmas becomes New Year. New Year becomes Candlemas. Still nothing. And then comes the detail that defines Arthur forever. The boy does not come to claim the throne. He does not even know there is a throne to claim. Arthur is there only as a squire, foster son of Sir Ector, servant to his older brother Kay. On the morning of a tournament, Kay realizes he has forgotten his sword. He sends Arthur to fetch one. Arthur runs through empty streets. Everyone is at the lists. The lodgings are locked. And then Arthur sees the sword. He does not read the inscription. He does not understand the miracle. He thinks only one thing. My brother needs a sword. Arthur grasps the hilt, and the sword slides free, effortlessly. No thunder, no angels, no struggle. Destiny reveals itself quietly. When Arthur brings the sword to Kay, confusion erupts. Sir Ector recognizes the blade immediately. He questions Arthur. Arthur tells the truth, plainly, innocently. Sir Ector kneels. Arthur panics. Why is his father kneeling? Only then does Arthur learn the truth. He is not Sir Ector's son. He is Uther Pendragon's heir. The sword did not respond to strength. It responded to right. The nobles refuse to accept it. A boy raised in obscurity cannot rule them. They demand repetition. Arthur replaces the sword. The nobles try again. They fail. Arthur succeeds. Again, and again, and again. At last, the people speak, and the people matter. The crowd proclaims Arthur king, not because of blood alone, but because destiny chose him openly. This moment reshapes Arthur's entire legend. He does not seize power. Power is thrust upon him. He is not ambitious. He is reluctant. The sword chooses him before he chooses kingship. That innocence is crucial. Arthur does not want to rule, and that is precisely why he should. The symbolism is ancient. Across Indo-European mythology, kingship is tested by signs. Sacred stones, unmovable weapons, objects that only the rightful ruler can command. The stone represents permanence, law, the immovable foundation of order. The sword represents authority, justice, the power to act. To pull the sword from the stone is not merely to prove strength. It is to reveal harmony between power and legitimacy. Medieval audiences understood this instantly. Kings were supposed to rule by divine will, but succession rarely looked divine. The sword and the stone dramatized an ideal, that the true ruler is revealed, not elected or conquered. Later tradition complicated the image. In many versions, this sword is not Excalibur. It breaks, or is set aside. Arthur will later receive a different blade from the Lady of the Lake, a sword of power, not proof. Two swords, two meanings. The sword in the stone proves who should rule. Excalibur determines how that rule is enforced. Modern retellings often merge them, simplifying the story. But something is lost when they become one, because the original legend insists on this truth. Legitimacy comes before power, and power without legitimacy leads only to ruin. For medieval listeners, the story reinforced divine order. For modern audiences, it speaks differently. It tells us greatness can emerge from obscurity, that authority should not belong only to the powerful, that the right person is often the one who never sought power at all. The image endures. The boy, the stone, the watching crowd, because it captures a universal longing. That somewhere, somehow, when the world is broken enough, the right hand will grasp the sword, and the stone will finally let go. In the next chapter, Arthur's rule will be tested not by destiny, but by magic. by a blade that does not come from stone, but from water. Excalibur. The sword in the stone proved Arthur's right to rule. But it did not guarantee his survival, because legitimacy without power is fragile, and the early years of Arthur's reign are dangerous. The nobles who knelt before him did so reluctantly. Some obeyed out of fear, others waited patiently for the boy king to fail. In several traditions, the sword from the stone soon breaks, shattered in combat, or set aside as inadequate. Arthur has the crown, but he lacks something more ancient, a weapon that does not come from law, but from the other world. It is here that the lake appears, not a grand ocean, not a raging river, a still body of water, wrapped in mist. Water, in Celtic mythology, is not merely nature. It is a boundary between the living and the dead, between the human world and the realm of spirits, between what is known and what is forbidden. Arthur comes to this lake guided by Merlin, the prophet who sees time as a spiral rather than a line. From the surface of the water, an arm rises, white, silent, clutching a sword. This is Excalibur, not forged by men, not claimed by force. It is offered. The Lady of the Lake does not crown Arthur. She does not kneel. She lends him power, and that distinction matters. Excalibur is not a symbol of law. It is a symbol of violence sanctified. With Excalibur, Arthur becomes unstoppable. In some versions, the blade itself cuts through armor as if it were cloth. In others, it is not the blade, but the scabbard that matters most, a sheath that prevents the wearer from bleeding. As long as Arthur wears it, he cannot die in battle. Think about that. The king's greatest protection is not his weapon, but his restraint. Lose the scabbard, and Excalibur becomes a curse. This detail reveals something profound. Arthur's power is conditional. It depends on balance, on wisdom, on self-control. Excalibur does not make Arthur king. It tests whether he deserves to remain one. The sword connects Arthur to an older Britain, a pre-Christian, mythic landscape of spirits, enchantresses, and ancient laws. While the church legitimizes Arthur through the sword in the stone, the land itself legitimizes him through Excalibur. Two authorities, two worlds. Christian order, pagan mystery. Arthur stands between them. That tension will define his reign. With Excalibur, Arthur defeats rebellious kings. He secures Britain's borders. He establishes peace long enough for something revolutionary to happen. Not conquest, but community. Because Arthur begins to realize that power alone cannot sustain a kingdom. Force can win battles, but it cannot create loyalty. And so, at the height of his strength, Arthur does something unexpected. He sets the sword aside. Not forever, but symbolically. He begins to rule not as a warlord, but as a judge. Excalibur remains close, but unseen, a reminder. That ultimate power is always waiting, and always dangerous. The Lady of the Lake will return only twice more in the legend. Once, when Excalibur must be returned to the water, and once, when Arthur himself is ready to leave the world behind. Water gives, and water takes away. Excalibur is not Arthur's possession. It is a loan, and loans always come due. In the next chapter, Arthur will attempt something no king before him dared to try. He will build a kingdom where power is shared, where no man sits above another, where violence is restrained by oath. He will build a table with no head, the Round Table. Arthur had conquered his enemies. Now he faced something far more difficult, his allies. Victory creates a new problem. When the war ends, power must be distributed. And power, once tasted, is rarely surrendered. The kings who bent the knee to Arthur did not suddenly become humble. They were proud men, warriors, nobles, heirs to ancient bloodlines. They accepted Arthur's rule, but each believed himself almost as worthy. In most kingdoms, the solution was simple: a throne, a hierarchy, a king above all. Arthur chose something radical. He built a table, not a metaphor, a physical object, round, massive, deliberate. The round table. No head, no privileged seat, no visible hierarchy. Every knight who sat there did so as an equal. In a world obsessed with rank, this was revolutionary and dangerous. Because the round table was not merely furniture, it was a political experiment. Arthur understood something few rulers ever do. Power concentrated too tightly will always turn inward. So he attempted to bind power with oath. Each knight swore to a code: defend the weak, uphold justice, speak truth, show mercy, seek honor over glory. This was not how real medieval knights behaved. This was how people wished they behaved. The Round Table was an ideal imposed on reality, and for a time, it worked. At the center of this dream stood Camelot. Camelot is never fully described in the legends. No maps, no measurements. That is intentional. Camelot is not a city. It is a condition, a moment when the world feels ordered. Peace reigns. Justice is visible. Knights seek virtue rather than plunder. Feasts replace raids. In Camelot, disputes are settled by law, not revenge. Women have influence. Foreigners are welcomed. For medieval audiences, Camelot was shocking. It suggested that power could be restrained by ethics, that warriors could be civilized, that a king could rule with others, not over them. But every ideal contains the seed of its own destruction. Equality creates comparison. Comparison breeds envy. Some knights became legends, others felt overlooked. Arthur's court attracted the greatest heroes of the age, men whose pride matched their skill. And pride does not coexist easily with equality. The Round Table demanded perfection, but it was built for humans. The code left little room for weakness. A knight who failed did not merely fail himself. He failed the ideal. And so, slowly, cracks appeared. Small compromises, unspoken rivalries, private desires. Arthur believed the structure would hold, that shared honor would outweigh ambition. But the Round Table was not tested by enemies from outside. It would be tested from within. Because Camelot's greatest threat was never invasion. It was corruption. And corruption does not announce itself with swords. It begins with secrets, with glances held too long, with loyalties divided quietly. The Round Table turned knights into symbols. But symbols cannot bleed. Men can. In creating a kingdom based on ideals, Arthur achieved something extraordinary. He created a standard, a vision of how power should be used. But he also set an impossible expectation: that humans could live as something more than they are. Camelot did not fall because the idea was wrong. It fell because the idea was too pure. In the next chapter, the Round Table gains its brightest star, a knight without equal, a hero whose courage embodies Camelot's dream and whose love will destroy it. Lancelot. Every ideal needs a champion. For the Round Table, that champion was Lancelot. He arrives at Camelot like an answer to prayer, young, unmatched in combat, courteous beyond expectation. Where other knights hesitate, Lancelot acts. Where others fail, he succeeds. He defeats giants, rescues captives, wins tournaments not for glory, but for honor. To the people, Lancelot becomes proof that Camelot works. To Arthur, he is the embodiment of the code. the living argument that virtue and strength can coexist. Arthur trusts him completely, and that trust will cost him everything. Lancelot's origin already sets him apart. He is raised not in Camelot, but in the other world, by the Lady of the Lake. He grows up between realms, half human, half myth. From the beginning, Lancelot does not fully belong. And then there is Guinevere, Arthur's queen. Guinevere is not merely a passive figure in the legend. She is intelligent, observant, politically aware. Her marriage to Arthur is strategic, a union meant to stabilize the kingdom. But Camelot asks too much of its people. Arthur is married to his role, to justice, to the kingdom itself. Guinevere lives beside greatness, but never with it. And into that silence steps Lancelot. Their love is never sudden. It grows in glances, in shared moments, in the space left by duty. Medieval poets understood something dangerous. The greatest threat to an ideal is not hatred. It is love. Lancelot does not betray Arthur by ambition. He betrays him by devotion to the queen. This is what makes the tragedy unbearable. Lancelot remains the greatest knight. He continues to defend Camelot. He saves Arthur's life more than once. He fights for the kingdom with absolute loyalty. And yet, the core of the Round Table is already broken, because the code demands truth. And the greatest knight is living a lie. The affair is an open secret. Whispers move through the hall. Eyes linger too long. Silence becomes accusation. Arthur knows, or senses, the truth, but he delays. To expose Lancelot would be to expose Camelot's failure. To punish him would be to shatter the illusion that the ideal works. So Arthur chooses inaction. And in doing so, he allows the wound to deepen. The irony is brutal. Camelot does not collapse because its enemies are too strong. It collapses because its heroes are too human. Lancelot is the perfect knight, and that perfection makes his fall inevitable. When the truth finally erupts, it does not merely destroy relationships. It fractures the Round Table. Knights choose sides. Oaths collide. Justice and loyalty no longer align. Arthur is forced to act as king against the man he loves as a brother. Guinevere faces execution. Lancelot rescues her in bloodshed. Knights die by the hands of knights. Camelot tears itself apart. Lancelot flees, not as a villain, but as a living contradiction. The Round Table was built on equality, but love refuses equality. It demands exclusivity. And exclusivity is poison to ideals. In trying to build a perfect world, Arthur underestimated the power of the heart. Lancelot's tragedy is not that he loved wrongly. It is that he loved honestly in a world that could not survive honesty. And while Camelot bleeds from this wound, another shadow has been growing quietly. Someone who watched. Someone who waited. Someone born of Arthur's own mistake. In the next chapter, the story turns darker. We meet the figure who does not break the Round Table by love, but by vengeance. Mordred. Every kingdom eventually meets the enemy it created itself. For Camelot, that enemy was Mordred. Mordred is not a foreign invader, not a Saxon warlord, not a monster from myth. He is Arthur's blood, and that is what makes him unstoppable. The origins of Mordred shift across versions, but the darkest tell the same truth. Arthur fathers him in ignorance. In some traditions, Mordred is the son of Arthur and his half-sister, a union born of deception, prophecy, or fate. From the moment of Mordred's conception, the legend becomes irreversible. Arthur learns of a prophecy. A child born on a certain day will destroy him. In fear, Arthur orders all infants born that day cast into the sea. A king who built his reign on justice commits his first true crime. Mordred survives. Whether by chance, magic, or destiny, the child lives. The attempt to escape fate becomes the act that ensures it. Mordred grows in Arthur's shadow. In some versions, he is raised at court. In others, he returns later, unknown at first. He is clever, observant, patient. Where Lancelot is open, Mordred is secretive. Where Arthur believes in ideals, Mordred believes in outcomes. He watches Camelot weaken, he watches the Round Table fracture, and he waits. When Arthur leaves Britain to pursue Lancelot or fight abroad, Mordred acts. He claims the throne, he takes the crown, he takes Guinevere, whether by force or by political necessity. Camelot, already wounded, collapses into chaos. Arthur returns too late. The final confrontation takes place at Battle of Camelot. It is not a glorious war. It is a massacre. Friends kill friends. Brothers face brothers. The ideals of the Round Table drown in blood and mud. Arthur and Mordred meet on the battlefield. King and son. Creator and consequence. Arthur kills Mordred, but Mordred strikes back with his dying breath. A mortal wound. Camelot ends not with a conquest, but with mutual destruction. The dream consumes itself. Arthur does not rage. He does not curse fate. He accepts. He orders Bedivere to take Excalibur and return it to the lake. The sword that came from water must go back to water. Bedivere hesitates. The blade is too beautiful to lose. Twice he lies. Only on the third attempt does he obey. When Excalibur is thrown into the lake, an arm rises once more and catches it. The other world withdraws its gift. Arthur is carried away. Some say to Avalon, some say to death, some say to sleep. The story refuses certainty, because certainty would end the legend. Mordred's victory is incomplete. He wins the battle, but he inherits nothing. No kingdom, no legacy, no dream. Arthur loses everything, except his meaning. Camelot's fall teaches a brutal lesson. No ideal survives contact with human weakness, not because ideals are wrong, but because they demand more than humans can give forever. Mordred is not evil incarnate. He is the shadow of Arthur's choices, the consequence of believing that destiny can be controlled, that prophecy can be escaped, that power can be purified. Camelot dies the moment Arthur abandons his own code. And yet, the legend does not end here. Because Arthur does not lie in a grave. He is not remembered as a corpse. He is remembered as a promise. In the final chapters, we will follow Arthur beyond death, into Avalon, and into the minds of those who refuse to let him go. Arthur did not die like other kings. There is no certain grave, no final confirmation, no full stop at the end of his story. Instead, he was taken to Avalon, an island wrapped in mist, a place suspended between the human world and eternity, a realm where time no longer follows human rules. The name Avalon means the Isle of Apples. In Celtic tradition, apples symbolize immortality, healing, and the other world. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth, Avalon is a land where fruit grows without labor, people live far beyond mortal lifespans. Magical queens rule, led by Morgan Le Fay. It is Morgan, sister, enemy, and final guardian, who receives Arthur onto his last vessel. 3, sometimes 9, women dressed in black row the boat into the fog. No one says Arthur died. They say only this: he was taken away to be healed. That ambiguity is deliberate. If Arthur dies, the story ends. If Arthur lives forever, the legend freezes. But if Arthur sleeps, then he can return. From the Middle Ages onward, people whispered of the once and future king. Arthur no longer belonged to history. He became a promise. In Britain's darkest hours, the legend rose again. Under Norman rule, during famine and war. When the nation needed unity, Arthur would return, not to rule, but to restore order. That idea terrified those in power. In 1191, monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed they had found Arthur's grave. A lead cross read, "Here lies the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon." The message was clear. Arthur is dead. There is no waiting. There is no return. But the people did not believe it. Because Avalon is not a location. It is a mythic space. Avalon is where dreams retreat when the world is no longer worthy of them. Arthur does not sleep because he failed. He sleeps because humanity is not ready. Symbolically, Avalon represents memory of a golden age, longing for perfect justice. The belief that the past was better than the present. Arthur does not return, because if he did, he would only witness Camelot fall again. So he waits. And every time the story is told, Arthur awakens, not in history, but in imagination, not as a historical king, but as a moral standard. Avalon is not paradise. It is an archive of myth. A place where unfinished stories are preserved, where Arthur exists forever, not aging, not dying, not failing, only waiting. Most kings die twice. The first time when they stop breathing, the second time when no one remembers their name. Arthur does not. Arthur is not allowed to die, because he is no longer a historical man. He is a mythic structure. Once a story transcends history, it no longer needs proof. It needs meaning. Arthur exists because humanity needs Arthur, not because he won every battle, but because he failed nobly. Camelot did not fall to foreign enemies. It collapsed because of love, divided loyalty, ideals too heavy for human hands. That is why the legend survives. If Camelot had lasted forever, it would be a fairy tale. But Camelot fell, and so it became tragedy. Arthur was the ideal king. But ideals alone cannot save the world, and that makes him believable. From the Middle Ages to today, each era creates its own Arthur. Feudal society needed a king chosen by God. Victorians needed a moral symbol. The 20th century needed a lost golden moment. The modern world asks, what is good leadership? Arthur adapts because he is not fixed. There is no official version, no single canon. Arthur is made of contradictions. A king who cannot control people, justice that still fails, power that cannot prevent betrayal. So are his symbols. Excalibur, rightful power, but only on loan. The Round Table, equality, but fragile. The Holy Grail, perfection, but not for everyone. Camelot, the most beautiful political ideal, and impossible to sustain. Arthur does not teach us how to win. He teaches us why good things collapse. And more importantly, why we should still try to build them. That is why leaders keep borrowing Arthur's image. From medieval kings to knights to presidents. Camelot once described the Kennedy era, not because it was perfect, but because it was brief and full of hope. Arthur reminds us, every golden age is short. That does not make it meaningless. But Arthur is also a warning. Do not confuse people with legends. Do not expect one individual to carry an entire system. Do not wait for the perfect king to save you. Camelot fell not because Arthur was weak, but because he was too noble to defeat those who refused to play by the rules. That is the tragedy of idealism, and that is the lesson. Arthur does not return, because if he did, he would only fail again. Instead, he stays in the safest place possible, in the story. Every time humanity asks, what is justice? What is good leadership? Is a perfect society possible? Arthur lives again, not in history, but in the collective imagination. Avalon is not an island. Avalon is where dreams hide when reality is not good enough to hold them. Arthur sleeps there, not to return, but to avoid betrayal one more time. And so, Arthur is not the king of England. He is the king of human hope, a king who never rules, and therefore never truly dies. Is Arthur hope or a dangerous illusion? Is Camelot a goal to pursue or a lesson to remember? Tell us what you think in the comments.